Tell me about your experience at the Boston Massacre.
Well, my husband James and I were walking home one day, and we came upon a few of his friends who had gathered outside of this tavern. And they were talking about how they didn't like this British occupation. And then they noticed that there was a redcoat right behind them. So they started to talk even louder. And then some of the friends came out of the tavern where James and his friends were talking, and they started to talk even louder about how they don't like this, and the tension started to brew.
So I sacrificed a lot over the years for America. I mean, after a few battles for the Americans, if you can call them that, I got shot in the leg. They chose other soldiers for promotions. They refused to acknowledge seniority. Slights over the years added up. Plus, the British offered to pay me pretty generously, £10,000 and a commission in their military.
Well, I'm Hubert Kelly, and I own a plantation. I have about 100 slaves working for me on my many acres in Maryland where they grow and pick tobacco. I did believe in the reasons we fought for during the Revolution. I'm a colonist who detested the taxes as much as anyone around me. I fought to get rid of them, as well as to keep the way of government and say that we had within our colonies.
The officer became uncomfortable. You could tell he was uncomfortable with the anger that was coming from the words outside of the tavern. And the small crowd that had gathered then began to direct their anger just towards that redcoat. And they drew closer to him, and I tried to hold James back because I was scared for him. And he told me, "Go wait by the tavern doors, Lydia." And so I did that, of course, following what he said to me. And soon I heard the officer calling out to the other troops nearby to assist him at subduing the crowd.
What is your opinion on America?
America? You mean the colonies? I mean, they aren't really their own country after all, are they? I don't know, the way they reacted to everything, not paying taxes when everyone else was. The colonists are really quite ostentatious, aren't they?
I did make every slave over 16 years old fight in the army. The way I saw it, we were fighting for everyone's freedom. If there hadn't been any slaves fighting, it would have been only white men fighting for all our freedom from the Britain. This made it fair.
It affected slaves different ways. It depended on the master. Some masters wanted you to stay home on the plantation and work. Others wanted you to go fight in the war. My master wanted us to go fight in the war. Every male over 16 years old had to go fight in that war. It's a terrible thing. War is a terrible thing. I got things in my head I can't get out. People bloodied and cut up and dying. Nightmares.
When I reached the end of the street, I turned around to see what was happening, and they were all yelling at that point and throwing snowballs at the redcoats that had come to join the original officer. Then there were troops in the distance, and they were threatening to shoot all of those people if they did not cease and desist. Some people came running past saying, "Where's the fire? Where's the fire?" They had heard the shouts of "Fire! Fire!" and I had to tell them that there was no fire of that sense. I had to tell them that a disagreement had started, a fight between some of the colonists and the group of redcoats.
Pre-revolutionary, well, I've heard of the Boston Massacre, as they call it. I mean, those poor, brave soldiers, I heard they threw snowballs at them. Can you imagine? And the Tea Party, of course, the throwing out all that tea, and I heard that they dressed up as Indians to board the boat. The horror. Heaven forbid any of them drink their tea, either. I mean, honestly, the horror of throwing it out. In all honesty, how do you think they do it? I mean, my friends came over last Tuesday. We all had tea. I mean, what do they do? It's quite antisocial, really.
Well, at Fort Ticonderoga, Ethan Allen's men and mine overcame a small British garrison. We took their resources, weapons, and rum, and moved them to Boston for the Patriots to use. My men and I played a pretty important role in the capture of that fort, but later on a colonel tried to downplay what we did. Completely disrespectful.
Did you believe in the ideals of why America was having a revolutionary war?
The ideals. I don't know why I was fighting. I guess I was fighting because I was told to fight. I was a slave and I was fighting. Never really thought about fighting for what America could be. Never really thought of it in those terms. If anything, I guess I was hoping for more opportunities for slaves, for people like me. I didn't really think I'd ever be free, but I was just fighting for more opportunities. I didn't really start thinking about being free until after the war was over. That's when I started to fight for my own freedom.
How did the Revolutionary War affect your life?
Couple ways. First, there was that 3/5 law. I don't know if you know about that, the 3/5 Act. For the first time, we didn't count for nothing. Now, we didn't count for a whole person, but we counted for 3/5. And I think that's a step in the right direction. It's somewhat hopeful. The other thing was, the Constitution, did you know that it says all men are created equal? That's hopeful. Now, a lot of people don't think that applies to the slaves, but I tell you what, the slaves, they take that as a sign of hope. Because we were all men, and we are created equal. So there you go. Another thing that was exciting was that after 1807, it's written in the Constitution that the states cannot import slaves from overseas. That's a huge thing, especially since a lot of states decided to ban it before 1807. A lot of slaves took that as very, very hopeful.
They are ridiculous. They put ideas into my slaves. All this talk about men being equal, and they think that it applies to them when it clearly don't. And the 3/5 Act that has put all these misconstrued ideas into their heads about them being real people, the law that ends the importing of slaves from overseas doesn't bother me too much, since we have enough to keep the population up without importing more. But the rest is maddening. Congress obviously didn't think about the problems it would cause plantation owners when slaves start singing about how they are something now, and how eventually that means they will be somebody.
Valley Forge, that was the winter of 1777 to 1778. It was a pretty harsh one. The conditions were pretty miserable. The weather was freezing, and we didn't have enough food or supplies for all the soldiers. It'd make anyone want to give up, just for some warmth and food.
Do you think the British soldiers were right in using force?
Well, the redcoats were being provoked, but the way they handled it, by killing 5 men and injuring even more. The British knew from the start that the colonists weren't going to welcome them with open arms. They had infiltrated all of our towns and were taking away our jobs. And then they shoot men because the poor colonists were frustrated at the conditions that they were being kept in, and had begun throwing snowballs and insults toward the redcoats. It was unjust.
Was the American Revolution inevitable?
I believe it was because the British were relatively unwilling to compromise. The Congress sent a petition for peace as they wanted to work things out diplomatically, but King George chose war, and the American colonists weren't going to submit and let go of their beliefs.
Due to the outcome of the American Revolution, would you still have switched sides?
Due to the outcome, would I have switched sides? Well, truthfully, I wouldn't have. Although the British paid me pretty well, they never really trusted me or let me hold any kind of military command. I'd always wanted a command. I moved to London, never found any work there, and the Tories of Canada didn't like me much either. In the end, neither side cared much for me, but at least if I'd stayed on the American side, I could have been on the winning side, maybe could have reaped some benefit. I was a friend of George Washington after all.
Do you think that a large-scale revolution is the key to our freedom?
I do believe that England was expecting a revolution from us. They had instilled standing armies in the colonies, something that is not allowed in peacetime, because they feared an insurrection. I don't think that England would have just given us freedom. I have seen that the more we asked Parliament for more freedom and more say in what was our government and taxes in which we had a say, the more they denied our rights as people. They only created more necessity for revolution, or else we would have just been subject to a life equivocal to what a slave's is like, one of no say for lack of degree when compared to another.
Why do you think the colonists fought?
Certainly haven't got a clue. Do they even know?
Why do Americans fight?
I guess we fight for freedom for everybody.